Cruel is a game that actually came out a year ago as of me recording this. The reason I'm talking about it now is because the developer released an anniversary update overhauling many of the game's systems. He's also stated that he doesn't have any more major plans for the game, and since this probably isn't going to be a Terraria situation, we can consider this to be the final version of the game. It's now got functional achievements, the challenge modes have been reworked, the perks have been rebalanced, and the game's visuals have seen a slight improvement. I was holding off on talking about Cruel because I had some concerns that the game might have actually been abandoned. The dev hadn't made any announcements for a long time, and I only knew an update was supposedly coming from reading the discussions page on Steam. So imagine my surprise when the thing does get an update, right on its anniversary too. I actually played the game close to its release and completed all of the content available at the time, so I'm gonna make some comparisons between the two later on. Cruel is another entry into the growing running and shooting people in corridors genre. You go through a burning building with the fire nipping at your heels the whole way, so stopping to soak in the sights is not a great idea. There's 10 floors to get through. They're not really floors since you constantly go up and down stairs, but who cares. Each floor introduces new enemies and environmental hazards while also getting larger. Every now and again you'll run into these soda machines carrying fuzz soda. It's got multiple uses, the most basic being as a healing item. You can also press left click to crush the can, releasing an AoE attack but not getting any healing. It's useful as a last resort. If you hold onto a can, you can spend it between floors by feeding it to this derpy white dog for a perk. You can also gamble for more cans, but if luck's not on your side, you're gonna lose a perk. And if you've got no more perks to give... There's a varied selection of perks, ranging from the more basic stuff like increased max health, an extra life or larger max for your weapons, but there's also more exotic things like being able to reflect bullets or gaining armor after you kick an enemy out of a window. A neat little feature added in the latest update is this jukebox radio thing that allows you to pick the music for the next floor. You move pretty fast, and you can utilize a slide to close the gap between enemies or to dodge bullets. Your feet can also be used to kick enemies, preferably through windows or into hazards like mines, but the kick can also give you some breathing room if you don't have a melee weapon on hand. Speaking of which, there's a metric ton including bottles, knives, hammers, baseball bats, pipes, bricks, and even katanas, although all of these seem to do the same amount of damage. Melee weapons are a one-hit kill if you manage to hit the head, and they can even be thrown. Beyond that, they can also block bullets if you swing at the right time. All of this degrades the weapon's durability though. By default, with no perks, you have about 8 swings before you have to say goodbye to it. Then of course there's your guns. You start with a revolver. It's a handy, accurate weapon with 6 shots. It's good for pretty much all situations, it feels nice to get headshots with, and it's probably your best long-range option. You'll encounter enemies carrying new weapons like the double-barrel shotgun, which is amazing at dealing with dudes and wife-beaters who really want to show you their baseball bat. The SMG, carried by the weird pig demons, is probably the best form of crowd control in the game because every hit staggers. Combine that with its fast fire rate and it serves well as a panic weapon. The anniversary update also introduced the lever-action rifle. It's a high-damage, pinpoint-accurate weapon that's only limited by its small ammo pool and the need to manually work the lever. It's carried by an enemy that looks kind of like a combination between a nun and a stripper. Every enemy will drop some ammo for one or more of these guns upon death. And that's all of your offensive options. It's nothing very complicated, but it all comes together to create a pretty smooth experience with a surprisingly high skill ceiling. Once you're in that flow state, you'll naturally chain these abilities, throwing a used up melee weapon at an enemy to pick up his weapon and use it on another guy across the room before whipping out a shotgun. It's extremely satisfying once you get it right, and it's got great feedback. Enemies light up when they're hit, doing an exaggerated janky animation. The game also plays a pretty satisfying sound on headshot kills. The enemy variety is really good too. To name just a few, you've got the basic cultist with a revolver, 2 varieties of ghost, skeletons that explode if they get too close to you, the Uzi-wielding pig demons, monkeys, a big dude with a chainsaw, and of course, the bane of many runs, the common crow. The crows used to be way more of a menace in the older versions because you'd take damage as soon as they brushed against you. They're the smallest enemy in the game, move fairly erratically, and they can break through any window. Fortunately, they're much more manageable now. A lot of things have been compared to Hotline Miami that probably don't merit the comparison, but I can feel some of that DNA in Cruel. While death is not instantaneous, it is freakishly quick, especially on any floor past 3. There's also the visual influence, going through dilapidated apartments, turning people into compost with guns and a baseball bat, while techno blares in the background. There's similarities to other stuff too. For example, the main enemy, the cultist, kind of reminds me of the ones from Blood from 1997. Since we're on that topic, let's talk visuals. It's got a grungy aesthetic to it, lots of graffiti and trash everywhere. There's also some ever so slightly edgy messages during the loading screens that feed into that idea. On the technical side, it's a bit more retro than something like Angerfoot, for example, with simple low poly models and a lot of pixelation. The game even uses 2D sprites for some of the clutter objects on the floor. There's also the fact that the world kinda warps, I guess that's the best way to put it. You don't notice this when you're moving, which is 99% of the game. The star of the show is definitely the music. It's mostly electronic, lots of harsh sounds and intense beats. There's not much more I can say about it other than the fact that I've been listening to it on and off for the past year. It's great, maybe not as great as Hotline Miami's, but definitely fitting for this game. Since the original release, there's been some new tracks added, but I'm not really a fan of any of them. They're alright, but they stick out when compared to older stuff like Wimp, for example. I think if you play the game for yourself, you'll be able to tell which tracks are new and which are old. There's no story to speak about, the developer doesn't really try to impose any moral onto the player or anything like that. And that's not a negative quality at all, but it bears mentioning because the game does borrow some of those do you like hurting other people motifs from Hotline Miami. You can see it in the loading screens telling you you're not a good guy or that all these enemies had families or whatever. At the end of the game there's also the option to spare or kill your chosen target. Oh yeah, right, I forgot to mention that you write down the name of something you want to kill at the beginning of a run. Cruel uses this stuff as an aesthetic and nothing more, unlike Hotline Miami, which had a layered plot and some themes to it. And I think that's part of the reason why I see myself replaying the latter rather than the former. All in all, it's just a fun game that knows what it is. It's arcadey entertainment that tests your reflexes. Not too harshly, mind you. Once you're done with the standard mode, there's also a melee only modifier, endless, and a perfect mode where you can't heal or get any perks. Perfect used to be a one-hit mode, but you still got perks so you could give yourself extra chances via things like shields. Counterintuitively, it's melee only that's harder than perfect mode because there's a few enemies that you really don't want getting close, like the monkeys for example. As a small reward for completing the game with different modifiers, you receive skins for your character, changing the look of your arms and legs. I'd say the game has largely improved since its original release, with balance changes to the perks being the main improvement. One change that I immediately noticed was to a perk called Z Fitness. You gain health back by crouching up and down in place, you know, doing squats. It was OP as shit because you could basically have full health before entering any room. In the current version, that same perk only gives you back a set amount of health per level, which is far more reasonable because the previous version just trivialized the game entirely. I'd say most changes in the anniversary version of the game are like that, small improvements that make the game more skillful and get rid of jank. So, as a TLDR, I thoroughly recommend the game. It's good for at least a dozen hours if you're into these types of games. Or I guess you could use it as background footage in your video talking about how much the games industry sucks. For some reason this genre of game is very popular in those videos.